Setting up a Raspberry Pi with the RetroPie distribution to basically have an all-in-one kind of arcade emulator. And then we're going to hook it up to our X-Arcade tank stick, which requires a little bit of extra configuration. HDMI cable, actual Raspberry Pi here, cool case, power cord, dedicated USB card reader heatsinks. Start with the case, get that open. Pretty basic looking case. Open that up now. I'm going to pry it open a little bit here. Go ahead and put the Raspberry Pi itself in there. So we've got our micro SD card, Pi itself. I'm just going to line this up. It should be pretty obvious where the, in this case, you can kind of see the HDMI and power kind of holders are. Just going to line that up. Just go the lip there. Might as well put these heat sinks on here. In theory, should help cool down the processors on here. So I'll line this up, push that down, and of course we got this smaller one. Put the rest of the case on here. Just gonna match this down, and then it should kind of snap in. Cover fits on. There it is. 32 gig SD card. So it came with this little USB card reader. Place it in like this. The USB card reader. I'll plug this into my computer. So I'm basically following the steps supplied by the RetroPie documentation here, which gives you all the links to, of course, all the necessary hardware, the download link for the image for the SD card, and then of course the instructions. So first step here, of course, is we got to extract the file that was downloaded from RetroPie. It's a kind of a compressed .gz file. If you're on Windows, you can use 7-zip to extract it. I'm on a Mac right now, so I'm going to have to go with the terminal. And of course I got the command right here. So I've placed the file in my downloads folder. It's got it right here, RetroPie, whatever, .img.gz. So I need to go to the terminal. I got to change directory, so I type cd space downloads and enter. And of course from here, now browsing the contents of my downloads folder, I can see RetroPie images there. So I have to extract that to run the g-unzip command, and then the name of the image. So of course, to avoid having to type it all, I can just start typing here RET, we'll hit the tab key, auto-completes the rest of the name, and hit enter. And it'll take a few seconds to extract the image. And the command prompt is back, so that means it's likely done. I'm just going to hit ls real quick, list my directory, and I can see now that I've got the .img file. This is the extracted contents from the .gz download file. I'm going to switch back to the Finder here. So of course the next part is getting the image burned essentially onto the SD card, and of course the installation instructions will point you to a few different tools. On a Mac, you've got this link to Apple Pi Baker. I have that downloaded here. It's a zip file. Luckily it's a regular zip file, so we can extract it. And I've got that application open. Now I'm going to double click it, and I've noticed here it's complaining that it's from an unidentified developer. So if this happens to you, just hit OK. If you then right click or control click on the application and then hit open, you can kind of bypass that security warning. So now I can hit open. First of all, I'm going to be asking for your admin password, so I'm going to type that in from my account. Hit OK, and it's opened up. Make sure it is, of course, the device you want. If you have like some other drive attached or something, just always avoid picking the wrong device here. And so I'll go ahead and choose that. And over here, I'll pick Restore Backup. So that will let me browse to Downloads folder. And then I'm going to pick the RetroPie image that we extracted earlier. And it is now writing that image to the disk. So this will take a few minutes. Alright, so the task is done. Looks like it's finished writing the image to the SD card. It has already unmounted and ejected. Alright, so I've got the Pi with card inserted. Right here I've got the power supply that came with the kit we ordered. So I need to start hooking all this up. Now we've already got kind of a little cabinet here. We've got our monitor, we've got the XRcade, we've got a keyboard, and so we need to plug all that in. I'll plug the USB power in. As soon as you actually connect it to power, it turns on. Analog audio jack here. Of course, you're hooking up to a TV. You pretty much just need HDMI, and that'll take care of your audio. Now, I've got some USB cables here. I'm going to plug in a keyboard, which you don't really need to keep the keyboard all the time, but it is real helpful for doing configuration stuff. Once you do get everything set up, you can then kind of mainly control it all from your controller. And then these other two USB cables are basically for our XRcade. We have the XRcade tank stick, which has an additional trackball on it. So it has these two USB ports coming out of it. So I'm going to plug both of those in. And we're on this side here. Okay. So it takes care of all that. Now I can finally get the HDMI. Situate that. So all that's left is to plug the power in. Pi is booting up. This first screen is like a little setup script where it kind of adjusts the file system on the disk to take advantage of the full SD card. And so this is going to be your typical boot screen once that's done. It tells us we have no gamepads detected, and we have to hold the A button on the device to configure it. At this point, we can go ahead and use the XRcade and tell RetroPie, or more specifically, consider this our controller. Now, of course, the way the control system is set up is it kind of assumes like the kind of Nintendo approach, where you have the A button kind of on the outer end, B is kind of closer to the center. So when it's referring to the A button, in this case, I'm going to use this button right here. And I'm going to basically consider this the B button. So I'm going to hold this right here. How the XRcade by default is treated, it shows up essentially as a keyboard to the operating system. So now it's going to ask, okay, we got to go through all the configurations. So it's asking what do we want as the D-pad up. So I'm going to move the joystick up, down, left, right. For the start button, I'm going to pick the player 1 start button here. For select, I'm going to go over here and pick the first button on the side. On the XRcade tank stick, you have two buttons on the side. So now it's asking for A. So again, I'm going to pick this button right here. B, I'm going to pick here. X here. And then Y. Now for left shoulder, I'm going to pick this button. Right shoulder here. And then if you're primarily using this for arcade games, the left and right trigger not as important to configure, but for now I am going to set it. So I'm going to pick these two buttons right here. Use this as the left trigger, and then this is the right trigger. Now the remaining configuration is kind of assuming you have additional thumbsticks, kind of like more modern controllers would have. so it doesn't really map to the X Arcade. So I'm going to basically do the press and hold to skip. So as long as you press and hold a button until the screen switches, that lets you basically set nothing to that control. And I'm just doing this to be able to not have any confusion with the controller. Okay. And at this point, the X Arcade can work. If I press the A button, I'll use it to go through the configuration. Now, since this is a first boot, there's no games on it, obviously. You have to supply your games yourself, of course. But we still need to do some configuration. Because leaving the X Arcade controller as a keyboard, as we just set it up, doesn't really give the optimal experience. Ideally, you can set the X Arcade to show up as two separate gamepads, and it makes actually configuration for any games a lot more easy, a lot easier that way. So the first thing is actually I need to set this up to connect to Wi-Fi. So I'm going to move this down to the Wi-Fi setting. A. Since this is a Raspberry Pi 3, it has Wi-Fi built in. So first option is we got to connect to our Wi-Fi network. So notice here I'm pressing these buttons, not really cooperating. This is why we have the keyboard. So I can use the arrow keys on the keyboard. I'm going to hit OK, hit enter. It's going to scan, so it should show your Wi-Fi network. And then of course now you have to put in your Wi-Fi password, so put that in. And then hit OK. It should be connected. So we're doing this so that we can then pull down the little tool that can make the X Arcade show up as proper gamepads. Also, when you have it on the network, it can make it easier to get your games onto the system. And now, good sign here, it says current IP, and it should show your IP address, so it means it should be connected. So I'm going to use the arrow key here, right arrow, hit exit, hit enter, and that should take you back to the RetroPie. So now that we're back on the main RetroPie screen here, what we need to do is actually exit from emulation station, basically the graphical front end here, and actually get to the command line. Hit your start button, which again I configured this button right here. I'll bring up the main menu for emulation station, and then navigate down arrow. I'm going to hit quit and hit the A button that I configured. When you pick this, it's going to ask for sure, and all it does is dump you back to basically the command line. And from here, we can then run the commands to pull in the X Arcade to Joystick tool. And then once that's set up, we can then basically go through the configuration again. On the screen here, I'm just showing this is the X Arcade to Joystick GitHub page, which has all the instructions for setting this up. And essentially, just need to run a few commands. But the first most important part is the downloading step, where it tells you you have to run the git clone command, which will then basically copy the repository directly to the RetroPie. And then from there, you got to run a few more commands to actually install it. And basically, once that's done, you can then treat the X Arcade as gamepads. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So, all right. Now, you can of course do this directly on your Pi. I know if you're sitting at the command line from the earlier step, you see something like this. So you can of course type in the full command here, make sure you get it all correct. So I've got git clone and then basically the address of the GitHub repository. So I'm going to hit enter, and that will start downloading it. This doesn't take too long. At this point, you then need to change into that directory that was created. So that basically will be the cd command, space, and then X Arcade to Joystick. Hit enter. All right. Once you're in that directory, all you need to do is run the make command. So you just type in make, hit enter, and it'll take a few seconds to basically do some compiling. At that point, once it's done, you then run sudo command make command install, and then the final step, sudo make install service, just like that. And again, all of these commands are exactly as seen on that GitHub page. So I hit enter. For kind of safety, just to be sure everything is good to go, you can then reboot the system. So you can basically then hit sudo space reboot. You hit enter. So if I try to use the Xarcade right now, notice how nothing's happening, right? And that's because once the Xarcade 2 Joystick tools have been installed, is now kind of ignoring the Xarcade. Now, when we initially configured it, it saw it as a keyboard, because that's how the Xarcade works. So for the moment, I'm going to have to resort to using a real keyboard to get back to the on-screen input configuration. And because we relied on the Xarcade, some of the placement of the commands is a little strange. So what I need to do here is I'm going to hit the number 1, because that is what the start button was bound to. To use basically the arrows, I'm going to have to resort to the number pad over here. So I'm going to hit 2 on the number pad to go down to configure input. And then if I hit the letter Z, that was basically what was configured as the A button to the joystick. And I hit it again, letter Z, and now we see configure input. And so this is a good sign. 2 gamepads detected. So that means that Xarcade 2 Joystick is working and is considering the Xarcade tank stick as 2 separate gamepads. So this is just like earlier, hold the A button on your device to configure it. So again, on here for player 1, I'm going to hold this middle button on the second row as the A button. Again, this is kind of following the Nintendo layout. And it says Xarcade to Gamepad 1. I know that would have went by really fast. But we see here Gamepad 1. All right, so the D-pad up. So I hit up on the joystick. And notice now it says axis 1 minus. So that's different from earlier where it was showing like actual letters and numbers. So it's working. So D-pad down, D-pad left, D-pad right. I'm going to hit start. Select will be over here, first button on the left. A, B, will be over right here. X, it's middle on the top row. Y, first one on the top row. Now for left shoulder, right shoulder, I'm going to pick this third button on the first row as left. I'm going to pick the third button on the second row as right shoulder. For left trigger, this button on the left here, right trigger here. Now once again, the configuration here is assuming we have the extra thumbsticks, so I'm going to just have to pick a button, press and hold until the input changes and you see not defined. Again, we're primarily using this for arcade games, so these inputs aren't necessary for the most part. So just kind of skipping through each one, making sure they all say not defined. The last step, hit OK. And now I should be able to use the joystick again, and there we go. So that shows it's working. If I hit this button here, or basically what's equivalent to the B button, that backs out. If I press the equivalent of the A button, it takes me deeper into the menu. Now, of course, we got to configure the second player side. So I'm going to hit the start button, navigate back down to configure input, hit your A button, and of course, it says 2 gamepads detected. So this time, I'm going to hit the second button on the second row over here on the 2-player side, and we see Xarcade to Gamepad 2. So there we go. It is properly showing up as a second gamepad. And this will make control setup significantly easier in most of the games. So got to go through the steps again: up, down, left, right. 2-player start, 2-player select. First one over here on the side of the sticks. A button, B button, X, Y, left shoulder, right shoulder, left trigger, right trigger, and then again, basically skip these inputs. Let it configure, and look at that, I'm able to navigate with the second player or first player controls. So we should now be set up and configured.
Cool. Now we can play video games, right?
Pretty much.
Cool.
Let's go ahead and set up a 2-player match here. And as you can see, all the buttons are configured. Using Street Fighter here because it just kind of helps to show like the controls just automatically get mapped. You know, you got your light, medium, heavy attacks kind of. So basically the problem is the instructions about how this thing is supposed to work kind of lie. And you can't just back out of the system. If you hit a certain combination, or if you hit the 2-player select and start, that should be the command to escape back. It's kind of it's not what the default kind of RetroPie kind of exiting command is, because they have to do some little tricks to get this to work. So what I found probably the best solution is to essentially go into the configuration, make a minor change, and then have, again, an easy way to exit out of the game. Now, if you're going to have a keyboard hooked up with your system, then you could use the keyboard to back out. But again, the whole idea is like you don't need a keyboard all the time. So for the moment, I'm stuck here in this game. I can't exit it. I'm going to hit 1 and 3, which basically translate to the normal default start, player 1 start, and player 1 select command that would back out of the game. So I'm just holding 1 and 3. Quits the game, and I'm back to the main interface. So at this point, I need to go make a configuration change. So I have to actually quit Emulation Station. So I'm going to hit the start button here, go back down to the quit command, I'm going to hit A, go to quit Emulation Station, really quit, yes, and that will dump you back to the command line. And so now at this point, I will show you kind of where to make your configuration change. All right, so from the command line, you need to basically navigate to the configuration directory for the gamepads. So I'm going to do the cd command, change directory command, and then I'm going to put /opt/RetroPie. Now again, as soon as you start typing the first few letters, you can usually hit the tab key at the command line, and it'll kind of do an autocomplete for you. So that's opt RetroPie configs all, and then RetroArch joypads. So this is the directory that gets created that saves your any controllers that you've configured. It basically stores the input mappings. So I'm going to basically change to that directory, hit enter. Now if I hit the ls command, ls, enter, it'll show there's 2 files here, xarcade to gamepad device 1, xarcade to gamepad device 2. Both of these are just these little CFG files. So we need to edit these to change a mapping that will allow you to have kind of a quick access to exiting a game that's running. So the kind of probably the easier way to do this. I'm going to use the nano command, which is basically nano is a simple text editor. So I'm going to hit nano space, and of course the name of the first config file. Now again, you can use tab. I hit capital X, hit tab, kind of auto-completed the rest. But it's kind of confused because these two files have a similar name. So I need, once it does the tab autocomplete, I'll hit 1 tab. And I should see now 1.cfg, hit enter, and we're now in the editor here. So you can kind of see here, each line corresponds to an input, and then on the right you are seeing the number that corresponds to like the device button. So what I've been typically doing for the Xarcade is I'm setting kind of the on that third row of buttons, the two kind of buttons that sit under the main 6. I set one of those to basically be the hotkey that has to be held down, and then when that's held down and press player 1 start, that will exit, and that kind of maps it back to kind of how the normal configurations will work for other controllers. So in this list, I'm using my arrow keys to navigate down. And I can see down here, looking for this one here, input L2 button. And it says equal to 6. So that means that that particular button on the device is corresponding to the number 6. Then I'm going to look for this here, input enable hotkey button equals 8. And I'm going to go to that, navigate with the arrow keys, hit back, put a 6 in there. Now make sure it just kind of looks like that, right? Input enable hotkey button equals quote 6 quote. And so now when we start this back up, we can just hold down that key and the start button to exit a game. To exit this, you first need to make sure you write the file. So according to the instructions at the bottom, we got write out here, so that's basically holding the control key on your keyboard and O on the keyboard, so control O. It says file name to write, so I hit enter, and I'm going to hit control and X to exit. And now the configuration has been changed. At this point, you can then, if you want to get right back into it, you can type in emulation station, just all together, one word like this, and hit enter, and that will start up the interface again, and we can test it out. Alright, so once you've typed in the emulation station command, it starts the interface back up. I'm going to hit the keyboard now out of the way. So I'll go ahead and pick a game here. And if you blink and miss it, there's like 2 little bits of yellow text that just show that you do have these controllers configured. So when my select button, start, everything's working. And so if I want to exit out, this button right here is the one I configured to be the hotkey button. So hold this, and player 1 start, and that will exit out. So there you go, you don't need the keyboard anymore. Doesn't have to be this key, but because again, I'm primarily using this for arcade games, I find these extra 2 buttons haven't been necessary, so that's why I decided to use that. And again, that was just to get around kind of some default configuration issues with Xarcade to Joystick. Hope that helps.